Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the NBA, Black Lives Matter, and the Chinese Communists. Fred Fleitz joins me, president of the Center for Security Policy, will be joining me, and America's Marxist Insurrection, burning churches. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth. America Can We Talk is sponsored by GC Works, a Dallas-based company performing advanced technology research in the oil and gas industry.
And welcome again to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. We mentioned in the past on this show that there is horrific treatment that occurs in the country of China, a particular group in China called the Uyghurs, who are a Muslim community, and they have been brutalized by the Chinese Communist Party. And when people use the expression slave labor, they often mean people aren't paid as well as other people or aren't paid as well as people think they should. In China, the Communist Party is actually mistreating the Uyghur community to the extent you can actually call it slavery. In fact, part of what's happening in China is that they round up, especially the men in the Uyghur community, they're sent to re-education camps where they are, and this is a Muslim group, so they are re-educated, which means they're tortured and told they need to give up their beliefs, embrace the Chinese communist beliefs. And in addition to that, and there was video, I didn't grab it, but there was video recently of the Uyghurs being loaded onto trains out of these re-education camps and sent to these factories where various things are being produced. And so they truly are what in modern day, in 2020, slave labor. But the reason it became relevant to the NBA and Black Lives Matter is that there has been more and more attention drawn to this fact that many products we want to purchase in America, including really cool things the NBA likes to sell, like its gear with the names on it, are manufactured in China and using this Uyghur community slave labor. And the NBA, as you know, we've talked about this on the show also, but they are really strongly behind the Black Lives Matter movement, even though we've been talking, many people in America have come to realize that the Black Lives Matter movement is Marxist in its founding. It's not just the people who found it happen to tout that they have been Marxist trained, but if you read the agenda on their own website, they are a Marxist organization. They are geared toward and aiming toward the destruction of the nuclear family unit. There is a profoundly anti-American group. So the NBA, because they had a shortened season because of COVID, are having this little mini season in Florida and decided after some player input, they're going to have Black Lives Matter painted on the floor of this basketball arena where the NBA will be playing. There's this little mini season. So I'm going to tie all these little dots together, connect all these dots to say it is seen by many as hypocritical that the NBA is in this protest supporting Black Lives Matter, and which is itself a dangerous Marxist organization responsible along with Antifa for destruction in America's cities. And we're still watching today in cities around the country, riots and burning and destruction still ongoing. And yet the NBA is perfectly comfortable in continuing to rely on getting their NBA products out of China, manufactured in China, compounded with that the NBA loves to have the country of China, the massive population of China, as a source of selling their goods also. So the NBA is pretty much benefiting from the mistreatment by the Chinese Communist government of the Uyghur population, and they are both getting their goods manufactured inexpensively, then sold, and this is just a massive marketing success story for the NBA, but not so much for the Uyghurs. And so fortunately, there was a bill proposed in Congress. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, has been talking about, first of all, he's been speaking up about the idea that LeBron James, who has all sorts of horrific things to say about America and he supports Black Lives Matter and he's denouncing America. This is LeBron James, the big cool NBA star, but seems to be okay with profiting off of slave labor in China. seems to be okay that the NBA is profiting off of slave labor in China. So Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri has been calling it out and just saying, this isn't really, this doesn't gel. You can't be, benefiting from this and attacking America and spouting off about Black Lives Matter at the same time. You don't really care about how people are treated, or you would not continue to allow NBA goods to be manufactured in China, given what how they behave. So Josh Hawley introduced a bill to fine American companies who rely on Chinese slave labor. I love that he's doing that. I love this attention brought to the horrific idea that here in 2020, when we think we're in the civilized world, we've moved past the horror of the past, that we still have genuine, honest-to-goodness slave labor in China at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. Very little concern expressed by most people in America. And it isn't just NBA products, to be clear. All sorts of products we in America like to be able to have and be able to purchase inexpensively are purchased at the hands of or as a result of the conduct of the Chinese Communist Party and their treatment of the Uyghurs. And more people calling attention. If you're going to sell products in America at an inexpensive price and you are doing that and you're using Chinese slave labor where you're having your products made, you're going to pay a big fat fine in America, which would be a great thing. And also, kind of closing off of the NBA, the hypocrisy of the language used attacking America and its culture. And obviously America is not perfect, but the NBA getting behind the very, very venomous anti-American rhetoric coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement and Antifa, but still somehow they're okay with the way human beings are treated in the country of China. A great example of hypocrisy, and I think Senator Josh Hawley is doing a great thing to call America's attention to it. And that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five. So I mentioned before we started the show, we have Fred Fleitz joining us. He's joined us in the past. I think we have him on video in just a moment, but he is the president of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., president and CEO. He has a fabulous history in his life. He has served in U.S. national security positions for 25 years in the CIA, the DIA, the Department of State, and the House Intelligence Committee staff. He's a very knowledgeable man in a variety of arenas relating to America's security policy. He was with the Center for Security Policy for a long time, left for a little hiatus to work with John Bolton, came back, and he's now president and CEO. And the reason I want him to join us today is because there's a new book out from the Center for Security Policy called Defending Against Bio Threats. It is a most timely book responding directly to the COVID-19 crisis and the virus that came from China and all the different issues arising out of and what we Americans should be learning from defending the bio threat we've all faced because of COVID-19. So I believe we have Fred Fleitz on the phone. Hi, Fred. Hey, Debbie. Good to be here. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're available to join me today. Okay, so before you show the book, I want to just tell this one thing. I think I saw it on your Facebook page or someone else's. But this book, again, Defending Against Bio Threats, is now #1 in nonfiction on Amazon. Is that right? I understand it's the #1 nonfiction terrorism title. Terrorism, okay. We're still very happy with that. I'm thrilled with it. I mean, it is huge because it is a very substantive book. Every chapter written by experts, most of these names you would know. I'm going to go through the chapters, but it is filled with expertise and substantive expertise. And this is the one thing I want to say. Well, first of all, Fred, why don't you show our listeners the book? I think you have it right there. That's what it looks like. I have it, Defending Against Bio Threats. We released it on Monday, and I'm very proud of it. It's something that looks at the current coronavirus crisis, but also looks at what our government needs to be doing to defend against future crises like this and what our enemies learn from our biosecurity weaknesses and how they may exploit them. Absolutely. And the chapters, I mentioned the chapters are so timely. And before I dive into those, first of all, I love that you did this. But second, as one thing I always have said to your predecessor, Frank Gaffney, and you as head of the Center for Security Policy, the reason I love your organization, a lot of people recognize a problem. Obviously, coronavirus, a big problem. Recognize that it came from China. Recognize we have concerns about bioweapons and concerns about where it actually came from and all the questions that relate to our security. But a lot of people will wring their hands and just discuss how, isn't this terrible? And, you know, we should do something about this. And I love the Center for Security Policy. You just leap into action, address the issues, find someone who is an expert, and not just simply explain what happened, but are forward thinking enough to think, how are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do so these things don't happen in the future? This isn't the only issue you guys have done this on. So I love your organization for that quality. It's forward thinking. It is assertively defending America. So I just want to commend Center for Security Policy for doing this book.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so sir, everyone got so panicked about this, and still is panicked about this this threat. So you have this Defending Against Biothreats book. You start with the chapter about the trail leading back to the Wuhan labs, and that was by Jim, and I think his last name is pronounced Garrity, right? Garrity?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have a quick notion what he's trying to talk about? Is it that we need to dig in, or is it that we already know where it came from, or we don't know yet? Do you know that information?
Well, National Review was kind enough to allow us to reprint a fabulous article by Jim Garrity in which he does an incredible deep dive on how this virus seems to have come out of a high security biolab in Wuhan, China. And he talks about the various Chinese individuals who are working there. And he has some details people aren't aware of about how this lab, not only was it engaged in research into bat viruses, and we're pretty sure the coronavirus is a bat virus, but he has job advertisements that were distributed outside of China trying to get people to come to this laboratory to experiment on dangerous bat viruses. And he gives a very good introduction to understand where this virus came from, and information that I think we can be pretty sure the Chinese government is well aware of and is trying to cover up.
Yeah, that last part about the Chinese government well aware of and trying to cover up, it could not be more true. I mean, there's been so much commentary about how they misled the World Health Organization, or maybe the World Health Organization knew exactly what was happening, but in any case, we weren't getting a square story out of the World Health Organization from the very beginning. And I love that someone dug in to talk about how it came from China and where it came from. So then also, before I go into all these, I want to be sure and mention, so your organization, Center for Security Policy, aren't you doing a series of webinars so people can actually listen to the authors of these various chapters? Did I read that correctly?
We are. We're doing a 5-part biosecurity webinar series. It started today. It started yesterday with Gordon Chang, who wrote on China's responsibility for the virus and what the Chinese government really knew, and Claudia Rosette, who writes about how the World Health Organization helped the Chinese cover up the virus. That was our first one. I believe our next one is going to be on July 27th, and in that webinar, we're going to have Dr. Ken Albeck. He's a former Soviet biological weapons scientist. He wrote 2 chapters in the book with his colleague, and he has some really interesting perspectives comparing, I might add, this guy developed biological weapons for the Soviet Union. He compares his experiences working on those deadly pathogens with the coronavirus, how they might be weaponized, and what we need to do to defend against this threat.
Oh my gosh, so valuable. I love that. So are these the kind of things, I don't know what these webinars, are they the kind of thing that any member of the public can sign up for, or are they really for supporters of Center for Security Policy?
Anyone can sign up. If you go to our website, securefreedom.org, we have an article on our site that gives the dates of all these webinars, and you can either watch them online afterwards, or you can sign up to watch them while they're live. And if you do that, you can ask the panelists questions about what they're discussing.
I just love how proactive that is, how people can tune in, they can listen to the experts, and as you say, if they're ahead of time, they may even be able to ask a question. I love that, and I love that you have things up later. Your website, you mentioned you get to it, securefreedom.org. That is for Center for Security Policy.org. You have so many great experts. You mentioned Gordon Chang, and he was just on the show a couple weeks ago, and he's wonderful too, but he's really good at talking about how the Chinese Communist Party very willing to cover this up, even after they recognize it's a pretty serious problem. So I guess that's, and he elaborates on that in this chapter.
Nobody's been tougher on the Chinese government about the virus than Gordon Chang. He's a friend of mine. He doesn't pull his punches. And basically what he says is Chinese leadership knew or should have known that their actions would result in the whole world being infected by this virus. He seems to think that the Chinese government deliberately infected the world. I'm not quite there yet, but I know a lot of people in Washington that's their belief, that the Chinese government knowingly let this virus spread around the world. But Gordon goes through chapter and verse about how this developed, the appalling cover-up by the Chinese government, and Chinese doctors and medical workers who tried to warn the government about this and were punished. Some of them died. Some of them just disappeared.
The famous, they were disappeared. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Gordon Chang is fabulous talking about China, his knowledge, not just about the current Chinese Communist Party leadership, but the history of China, the thinking inside the Chinese mindset, really some of it going back as far as a long time ago about this world domination goal some people have embraced within China's leadership. They are supposed to be the race that rules the world. He's gone through that several times on my show. So fabulous. I saw Rosemary Gibson did a chapter, and she's the one, is this the same woman who wrote the book, China RX, that was talking about, yeah. You want to just talk a little bit about what she's talking about?
Well, among the things we have to do to stop another coronavirus pandemic crisis is to stop our reliance on China for critical medicines and medical supplies. And there are bills in Congress right now to bring this production home. And we know that in the middle of the pandemic, when we were criticizing China, China threatened to cut off supplies of these drugs and medical supplies. That has to end.
It was truly egregious. And her book, China RX, came out before the coronavirus came along. And even then, she was raising the alarm bell saying America is too dependent on China for various vital medications. And that when you get things in America, often in doctor's offices or hospitals or pharmacies, you just don't even consider where they were made, but many of the American pharmaceutical companies are actually doing the manufacturing in China. So it was a brilliant book when she first brought that out before the coronavirus. But I thought about her when the coronavirus came along. She's going to have a lot to say, and I'm sure she does, a lot to say about why we are continuing to rely on China for medications or any kind of. Yeah.
During one of our webinars, Frank Gaffney will be interviewing Rosemary Gibson just about this subject.
Oh, it's so good. Okay, I also know I should have Claudia Rosette, she was on my show years ago. She's so brilliant. I mean, everyone in this book is brilliant, to be clear, but she's so brilliant. So I thought she goes into the idea about how the Chinese communist virus was handled at the World Health Organization. And as I was mentioning earlier, there's a lot of suspicion about whether China duped the World Health Organization or the World Health Organization was well aware that China was misleading them. But she dives in, I'm going to assume, and tries to ferret out what happened inside the World Health Organization. Is that right?
Claudia is an award-winning journalist. We're happy to have her. She knows a lot about the UN, and she just talks about how China has colonized the World Health Organization. They helped the current director general named Tedros to get this job. He's incompetent. He was incompetent when he worked in Somalia on various health jobs. He's been working and carrying water for the Chinese government since he got in there, and he's deliberately helped China put forward its false narrative on the origins of the virus. He's been quick to criticize President Trump for travel bans. He has no criticism of the Chinese government.
That is truly astonishing. It's truly astonishing. Okay, and this next chapter, I will tell you, I just downloaded the book on my iPad. skim. I am going to dive in and read this because every one of these chapters sounds so just so helpful. But the next one was the lessons terrorists will draw from the coronavirus pandemic. That was Charles Faddis who wrote this one. I have to tell you, I've had that thought. The kind of things that you wake up worrying about is as America looks weak, as we flounder, as we don't react as a strong country, this is what terrorists begin to surmise about the character of our country. Is that where he's roughly going with this? Do you know?
We have 2 chapters in this, one by Sam Farris, one by Shauna Bryan and her husband, Stephen Bryan. And they talk about what terrorists have learned from this. But you got to read Faddis's chapter very carefully, because he talks about how security problems at biological laboratories in researching very dangerous pathogens are weak. Now, we've heard reports of problems with security at Chinese biolabs in Wuhan, but there are problems with security at American labs. I don't know if you knew that the high-level biolab at Fort Detrick was shut down last year for security problems. In 2014, vials of smallpox that were left over were found at a laboratory in Bethesda, Maryland, a government laboratory. Faddis's point is that if security at American biolabs are this weak, what's the story at sensitive laboratories around the world? The terrorists won't have to make these pathogens. They can steal them because the security is inadequate.
That's a truly horrible thought. That is a truly horrific thought. And so I will definitely enjoy both those chapters. You also have one here called Understanding the Bioweapons Threat, Its Implications for Defense Against Natural Epidemics. And so really just responding to something that wasn't maybe cooked up in a lab, but we should be learning every time Americans, our healthcare system, our medical system, every time we have a threat like this, we should be learning new things. And I assume that's roughly what they're getting at in this chapter, or do you?
Yeah, this chapter by Ken Albeck, he's the former Soviet biological weapons scientist, and Albina Touche, his colleague. This chapter and the next one both basically look at the coronavirus epidemic and talk about how to prepare defense, which is extremely difficult, especially for a virus that has asymmetric carriers. But he also folds in his experience working in the Soviet biological weapons program. He compares the coronavirus to smallpox, which is another pathogen that is easily transmissible, person to person. His chapter is very technical, but we didn't write this. We wrote this book for a number of audiences, and one are for high-level U.S. policymakers who need to really double down and put in place measures to prevent this from happening again. And there's so much we have to do.
So much. Yeah. Okay, you have 3 more chapters, and I will just tell what they are. International Biological Defense Verification, Paula DeSutter, the U.S. Biodefense Strategy in the Time of COVID, Reality and Truths on Policy, Stephen Elliott. Last one, Back to the Future, Biosecurity Lessons from the Late 1990s for the Year of COVID-19. So you've covered a wide gamut, and I want to turn to, I'd love to let you comment on those last 3 chapters, but I want to turn to something you also wrote. It's called Decision Brief, Voters Must Demand a Real Bipartisan Strategy for Defense Against Bio Threats. So before I get to that, the last 3 chapters, any highlights you want to mention about those last 3 chapters?
They are by 3 government experts who worked in arms control. And I'll just say briefly, they look at what the government and the international community is doing, and they basically say they're not doing much.
Well, that's a bad thing for you to say. Gosh. But I mean, I'm glad you're saying it, but oh my gosh. Well, again, I love the Center for Security Policy dove in and just decided we're not going to just cower in fear or kind of play defense, but this is really this is playing offense. This is saying we're going to dig in, we're going to understand, and then we're going to find ways to fix this, to defend our people. So love that you did this book, and I love that it made Amazon bestseller nonfiction terrorism.
If I could add on the decision brief, this is sort of a summary of what the book is about. We believe that elected officials at all levels, not just the president, but at the state level, the local level, have to do a lot more to solve this crisis. They have to recognize what this crisis is. We have to work in a bipartisan way to solve it. And to be very frank, Debbie, the American voter has to punish politicians who are just using this as a political weapon and are refusing to recognize China's responsible for it, and that we have to work together in a bipartisan manner to solve it. And I've regret in Washington that's not going on right now.
That was actually my next question, is how are we doing inside? I mean, obviously we're in a particularly toxic political environment, so it's very hard, I think, for Americans to envision that whoever has the majority after the fall elections, that you're going to have the parties work together. But if there's anything that ought to inspire everyone, it is something that could be like this virus. It's an equal opportunity killer. It is very dangerous. It doesn't matter what your political views are. And so the idea that you ought to be able to come together on this. So when you say nothing's happening, why is nothing happening yet?
Look, the Democrats, Joe Biden, Schumer, and Pelosi, they won't talk about how China's responsible for this. All they want to do is blame President Trump. There's nothing from them on measures that should be taken to defend the American people, improving our stockpile of medical supplies, looking into where the virus came from in Wuhan. They say nothing about that. All they want to do is use it as a political weapon, and it is endangering this country. The American people have to really say stop. We need to work together on this. This virus isn't Republican or Democrat.
Right. Yeah, equal opportunity killer. So I want to urge our listeners again. I tell you, the only complaint I have, now that I have you on screen, the only complaint I have about the seminars at Center for Security Policy is I can't get to them on show days because I have to be getting ready for this show. But they're so fun to go listen to afterward. And I want to encourage people, if you want to be able to talk about issues with your friends in a more informed way, these are great resources because they're great conversations. They lay out things very clearly, and they're very just vitally important issues. So I really do urge people to go register for these webinars. You're calling them webinars, and you go to Secure Freedom. Yeah, go ahead.
No, they're webinars, and you can register for them on our website, securefreedom.org.
I love that. I urge people to do that. Securefreedom.org. You just feel so informed. And actually, it's a website, as I'm going through preparing for the week shows, trying to think of what will be interesting to talk about this week. It's one of my regular websites I scan because it's so full of great information and a lot of relatively short articles that you can skim pretty easily and get a sense for what the issue is. So, Fred Fleitz, I love this. Do you want to hold up that book one more time? People should see this.
It's available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon.com right now.
Defending Against Bio Threats. It is a really comprehensive, well-informed, and just great thing for everyone to get. So urge people to order that. And I got it on my happy iPad right here. Going to dive into it in the next 4 days. And Fred Fleitz, thank you so much for taking time to join me.
Great to be here. Thanks, Debbie.
Great talking to you, sir. Okay, that's a great organization. You know, I've talked about them a lot in this show, and they actually deserve all of the praise that I give them. They're truly stellar organization. One last kind of closing point about China. I'd meant to say this earlier, but there was actually an incident that I wanted to mention, or two incidents. One was in Houston, just happening over this, maybe yesterday or 2 days ago, which was that the Americans, our government had ordered the Chinese embassy in Houston to close, and because they were concerned about security. And then there was a fire reported in the courtyard of this Chinese embassy in Houston. Fire big enough, apparently documents being burned. Fire big enough that the fire department got called. Unclear how that will all unfold. And the other thing was that the federal government did indict 2 Chinese nationals here in America for allegedly trying to hack in and steal coronavirus research. The Justice Department announced on Tuesday this week charges against 2 Chinese nationals who allegedly tried to steal U.S. coronavirus research and proprietary information from corporations and the government. I have to tell you, if we get to healthcare solutions, more healthcare solutions that are going to help us deal with the coronavirus, this is a great thing. I hope we share it with the world. But we have to, in this country, every time there's an effort to hack, especially by the Chinese, they need to know we are watching. We are not going to permit it to happen. We are savvy enough to be on top of it, and we're not going to let these people, steal secrets through cybersecurity in America. We're going to arrest them and prosecute them as we are doing. One last story for today, my very fine friends. I called this segment America's Marxist Insurrection Burns Churches. And the reason I want to connect some dots, We've been talking about Antifa, however you want to say it, the fascist organization that tried to delude Americans by naming themselves the anti-fascists. That's what Antifa is. It's short for anti-fascist. They're a fascist organization, and we had a brilliant guest on this show weeks ago talking about the roots of Antifa. It's actually a very old organization, communist, very anti-American organization, and they have locked arms with the Black Lives Matter movement in America. And they are part of this ongoing destruction of our cities, burning our cities, graffiti everywhere, smashing store windows, stealing things, you know, just literally destroying America from the inside. That's what is happening. An interesting thing, though, I wanted to mention, and this has to do with the topic of this, is that of this segment is, you know, if you still are duped into thinking that the entire Black Lives Matter protest and the Antifa protest around this country is really all tied to the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis at the hands of the police in Minneapolis, then I need to disabuse you of that thought. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, destruction of American cities has nothing whatsoever to do with Black lives, nothing to do with racial justice, nothing to do with George Floyd. It is a Marxist undermining attack on America using the excuse of the George Floyd very tragic death in Minneapolis to launch an attack on America. One element of that is really worth considering is why. Say you were a real, genuine, you're a protester who just wants to get on, get out there in the world and do your protest because you're upset about George Floyd. Why is it that you would, in the course of these protests, burn down churches? Why? How is burning down a church tied to the Minneapolis Police Department? And obviously it's not. And I want to tell you how frequent this has been in the course of these protests in America, this Antifa and Black Lives Matter protests, burning or destroying religious statues in New York, Massachusetts, Florida, California, Missouri, burning churches, Queen of Peace Catholic Church in Ocala, Florida, the church, I believe it's Episcopal Church right across from the White House, churches and religious statues burned. Why? If you are going to try to legitimize what the left and the Democrats are saying is the reason for these protests, there should be some logic there. Why would you, in protesting the Minneapolis Police Department, destroy Christian statues in cities around the country? Why? Why would you burn churches in cities around the country? And the answer is because these marches, these protests have nothing to do with George Floyd or Black lives or police brutality. They are Marxist in nature. The Marxist element in this country that has been in this country for decades. The Communist Party coming here in the 1920s, they've been cultivating American society to embrace communist ideas, and you can just don't let some ninny on the left try to get you to nitpick and say, well, you can't say communist because it's really only Marxist, and Marxist is really not that, it's only socialist. All those isms live in the same ugly, tyrannical corner. Communist, Marxist, socialism, all these groups, they are just simply tyrannical power seekers who wish to destroy the United States of America. And the answer to the question of why those groups are destroying churches is because Marxists, socialists, communists, leftists hate religion. They hate religion. The very founder of Marxism, Marx himself, described religion as he was the father of communism, which has been a barbaric political system in this world, responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people in the 20th century. That's what this Marxist, the father of communism, Karl Marx, he talked about religion as the soul of soulless conditions, the opium of the people. People who rise to power as communists, socialists, Marxists, always destroy churches, always outlaw religion, always arrest priests and pastors. They are disappeared. They just never show up again. Why you have the Chinese Communist government currently today in the 2020, the Communist government of China is in the middle of rounding up Christians and forcing them in their homes to get rid of all Christian symbols, whatever they would have, a Virgin Mary statue, a cross, whatever religious symbols they have. This is an ongoing effort. The Chinese Communist government forcing its Christian citizens to throw away, to get rid of, to trash all symbols of Christianity, and instead put a picture up of the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, or other symbols of communism. Again, you have to connect those dots. The reason communists, Marxists, socialists, the reason these people hate religion is because they are tyrannical and they want to control the thoughts and beliefs of the people. They want to tell you what to think about everything. They want to be the one entity you turn to, the all-powerful God in your life. In the communist movement, the communist mindset is the Communist Party, the communist government. And when people have faith in something else, something bigger, something to Christians around the world, more real, more meaningful, when people have faith in that, they're not so easily controllable and manipulable. It is why, since in every time in this world, since communists, socialists, Marxists took control of any country, of any people, they go after the churches. And now you come back to the United States of America and ask yourself, what does this Marxist uprising in this country, why are they destroying Christian churches and statues and symbols of Christianity? Why? And the answer, I already told you. The answer is what I just said. Because these people are Marxists. Because their ultimate goal is not to have an America with a robust freedom of religion and robust set of rights that we all recognize emanating from our Bill of Rights and the Constitution. It's because Marxists are about destroying freedom, destroying your rights. And so the idea of beginning the destruction of churches is not just that the Marxists are on the path of destroying churches and burning churches and tearing down statues and religious symbols. The entire left in this country, the leftists in this country who now control what used to be a radical left, communist, Marxist, socialist movement is now mainstream Democrat Party. It is why leftists in this country, Democrats in this country, are utterly intolerant of freedom of religion. It's why you see more and more effort of groups in this country to shut down religious freedom, to argue that people's religious freedom should be narrowly circumscribed to where they attend church on Sunday or what they say in the privacy of their own homes. The antagonism leftists feel against religion stems from the reality that leftist mission, their political mission, is to be tyrannical and to lead and dictate to every single person everything you think. And religion gets in their way because people form their values based on religion, and the communists can't do anything about that. So recognize it matters that the Marxist movement in this country is destroying churches. There's a great piece about that on our website, americacanwetalk.org. If you go to our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links, I link to this article making these very points. And I want to make a couple other points that relate to this. Once you grasp this reality, once you grasp the truth that the movement we are seeing destroying our cities in this country, destroying cities, attacking cities, people are just, governors and mayors just surrendering to this Marxist uprising. This is an insurrection against America. It's not legitimate political protest. It is an actual insurrection against America. The sooner we see it as that, label it as that, and then treat it as an insurrection, the safer America will be, and the sooner we will be past this, we will be able to squelch this movement in this country, this astonishing actual insurrection against America. So when Donald Trump, President Trump, sends in troops to Portland and says, you're gonna stop, this is not out of line for the president. He actually has a duty to put down insurrections. We have to get past, in this country, we have to get past this delusion the left is trying to foist on us. So we think that the Republicans have their view, the Democrats have their view, and we have these protesters, and they're somehow in the ballpark of mainstream America. They just happen to be Democrats. They just happen to be behind Black Lives Matter, and they happen to be Antifa people, but they're still in the American playing field. They're not. They are trying to overthrow America. And I know that people listen to what things like I'm saying, and they go, oh my gosh, you've lost your mind. This is hyperbole. This is exaggeration. This is just a movement. This is just opposition to police brutality. It's just opposition to the way that George Floyd was treated. No, my friends, it's not. It is not. We are watching the beginning of an insurrection, the overthrowing of America. It is why you have people more and more concerned, why you ought to be asking yourselves, why do all these Democrat mayors permit the destruction of their cities, the destruction of the businesses that their own citizens own? Why do they permit the overrunning of businesses and cities, allow them to be destroyed, burned, smashed, and dissolved, and they say nothing? Why? You have to understand, number one, Democrats own Antifa. Democrats own the Marxist movement in this country. Democrats own the Black Lives Matter Marxist movement. It must be hung around their necks in this election cycle because they will not renounce it. They will not stop it. And then the second point, so Trump is right to send in troops. The second point I wanted to get at is it's really important to understand that not just does President Trump have the authority to stop these things, he actually has the obligation to stop these things. The power of the federal government, the duty of the president, is to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That is the president's job, to defend the Constitution, which means the constitutional structure of our country, the freedom of our country. It is the duty of the president to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. And I say that because it's very hard for many people to actually look at and watch what the left is doing and see it in any other terms other than that, well, this is just a protest. This is just because of George Floyd. This is because it's an election year and the left is getting their voters stirred up. We will lose our country if we don't get a handle on what is happening in the streets of America. And to that end, we are allowed, in fact, we are required, President Trump and the people, his advisors, the office of the president is obligated to defend America, defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We have to begin characterizing Antifa and the Black Lives Matter Marxist movement as actual terror organizations, as actual domestic enemies, and treat them that way. Treat them as domestic enemies. Treat them as people involved in movements that would otherwise overthrow our constitutional order, otherwise overthrow our country if they are not put down. And I want to tell you that this topic came up because there was a piece written by sadly, one of the many people who remained in the U.S. military, survived the purging of the high ranks of the U.S. military under President Obama, who, after 8 years, had driven out many genuine patriots and kept the leftists inside the leadership of the military, not 100%, but left inside the leadership of the military, people who really were not, he left inside the ones that he could work with, that would be more amenable to what the radical changes he was trying to bring to this country. And Obama removed from the military high-ranking officials in the military who were more aware of the idea of America, the duty of the military in America to support the founding of America. So there was an article on June 2nd in The Atlantic. We talked about The Atlantic before. Radically leftist, anti-American, poses as a really intellectual source because they write long articles and they have a very self-important tone and very condescending, intellectually superior tone. But The Atlantic is a radical leftist rag, and they had an article in which the chairman, this is June 2nd of 2020, an article by former chairman of the Joint Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, who was writing about the turmoil in our country, which we're still enduring, but he wrote about the turmoil in our country saying, our fellow citizens are not the enemy and must never become so. That is wrong. That is incorrect. When people who possess American citizenship and have a legal right to be here, but are engaged in the Marxist overthrow, the attempted Marxist overthrow of our government, the attempted effort to urge more and more Americans to get behind the Antifa movement, get behind the Black Lives Matter movement, and they are destroying property. They are building their political credibility. They're building their political strength. I'm not saying Antifa and Black Lives Matter could overthrow America tomorrow. Of course not. We have enough people in America who still love this country and will defend it. But what you have is a growing insurrection inside our borders, a growing insurrection of people who are citizens and are committed to their agenda of the Marxist overthrow of America. The fact that they can't get there tomorrow or next month does not mean that we should simply tolerate it. We have to be able to define them, to recognize they are domestic enemies. And so this guy went on to write about Mike Mullen again. He is the former chairman of the Joint Staff. Admiral Mike Mullen wrote that our own fellow citizens cannot be the enemy. And so there's a great piece that was written in response to that. And again, it's up on our website. You can read it at americacanwetalk.org. It's a response to that argument that's saying, no, actually, an inconvenient fact, Admiral Mike Mullen, but our Constitution actually contemplates the existence of domestic enemies. We talked about that, and America talked about that even before we had the whole country founded and put together, that in order to have a country, so in 1775, this was written, before the Declaration was even signed, this idea, if you're going to be a country, you have to recognize you have the obligation, the sovereign obligation, to protect that country against enemies, foreign and domestic. You have to protect the country, and it is the duty and not only the right of the president, but the duty of the president, and law in this country backs the president with the idea it is his job to put down insurrections in this country. We need to be, I'm not saying, I know that what I'm saying may sound really radical to you. I'm not saying that we need to have the military brought out in every city in America and squelching all these protests. I'm not saying we're there yet, but we at least have to cross the intellectual line that says we must admit to ourselves that some of this protest, some of this conduct, not even protest, riots, murder, property destruction, the pure mayhem and mob mentality in this country is part of the Marxist effort to overthrow this country. It is a Marxist movement, and right now it's small, can't win the day tomorrow or in the next month, but we can begin to recognize intellectually we have to define it as an enemy, a domestic enemy, and that we have authority in this country to fight back against domestic enemies. We don't have to wait until the entire country is burning. We don't have to wait until they're holding power till we begin to negotiate. Is it possible we can have our rights back again? Could we have America again? Can we have our freedoms again? We can begin to recognize because they are domestic terrorists, they have to be treated that way. Antifa, the Marxist Black Lives Matter movement must be treated as domestic terrorists and actually treated as enemies within, domestic enemies whom the president has responsibility and duty to the American people to shut them down. I am not specifically advocating for immediate use of military force anywhere, but I am making the argument that we need to begin to recognize, of course, the president has not only the right, but the duty to put down domestic insurrection in this country because we know intellectually what's behind it. Intellectually what's behind Antifa. It's a communist organization back from Germany in the 1940s. It has existed since then, and it is a communist, anti-American movement. We have to be able to define communism as anti-American again. We have to stop acting like we can't really say that communism is anti-American. Of course it is. We have to define these organizations who, by their own documents, by their own words, are acknowledging they are committed to the Marxist movement. They are domestic enemies, and President Trump and future presidents need to treat them as such. My very fine friends, I try to, at the close of every show, tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. And so today, we start out our show talking about the NBA, BLM, and the Chinese Communists. The NBA touts allegiance to Black Lives Matter is to be placed in writing on NBA courts, overcoming systemic racism in America, denouncing the slavery at the time of America's founding, but apparently no clue or no care about Black Lives Matter Marxist anti-American charter. China represents a market of 1.2 billion potential fans. Chinese factories for Nike and others produce NBA shoes, jerseys, other merchandise. Chinese factories utilize slave labor, not figuratively, literally. U.S. Senator Josh Hawley stepping out to propose fining U.S. companies that use slave labor, and the NBA is silent. The NBA has walked itself into a credibility-destroying mess of blatant hypocrisy. Mega millionaire players professing social justice credibility, profiting off of slavery. Some fans will clearly be completely turned off. Only question is how many. And on America's Marxist insurrection burning churches, churches recently burned or damaged in Massachusetts, New York, Florida, California, and Missouri. What on earth does the burning of a church have to do with George Floyd? Nothing at all. It has to do with the BLM being a Marxist organization intent on overthrowing American government and society. Marxists hate God, hate churches, hate America's Judeo-Christian foundation. They are engaged in a violent insurrection against this nation. America decided in 1775 that it must have authority to put down insurrections, otherwise the republic, yet to be formed, could be lost. Presidents have the authority and the duty to put down insurrections. Do enough Americans still understand the difference between a protest and an insurrection? Trump does. Democrats don't. They are backing this insurrection against America. Let's hope America's military still has generals who do understand. And that, my very fine friends, is my show for today. This is America Can We Talk? I'm Debbie Georgatos. Thanks for tuning in every Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, to America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.